So Max, did you go and see Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice?
With a 33% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, not a fucking chance.
Yeah, from what I heard, the critics are kind of panning it for the same things we warned about in one of our previous After Hours. Actually, no, not even one. Several of our previous After Hours. We talked about the concept of Zack Snyder doing Superman versus Batman, etc., and the fact that it was going to be action schlock with zero substance. And guess what happened?
We were right. Once again.
We were right. So, I don't know about you, but I've been spending most of my superhero time not only rewatching Deadpool, but actually watching a property on Netflix that has caught our attention even last year and is out for season 2 this year.
And what show that might be?
It's the Punisher show.
Guest starring Daredevil.
Yeah, it's a Punisher show starring, has Daredevil in it somewhere, right?
Uh-huh.
But you know why everyone's watching this season, especially. It's because of the fucking Punisher.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, Elektra's not showing any skin this season.
Well, we did get to see her naked bag for a total of
5
seconds.
That's right. There was a sex scene. Spoiler alert.
So, but yeah, that's what we're going to talk about, folks. Daredevil Season 2, and this conversation is probably going to be similar structure-wise to our True Detective Season 2 discussion, because we did not talk about Daredevil Season 1 last year, which is kind of odd because both of us were legitimately impressed with the show. Mm-hmm. Neither of us had been any major Daredevil fans like of the comics. I mean, I obviously known who Daredevil was, as well as the Kingpin.
You didn't like Ben Affleck as Daredevil?
No. I think everyone, including Ben Affleck, would rather forget about that movie.
He can't forget about it. Remember the sad Affleck meme that's going around for the guy, the interviewer saying, yeah, you know, it's kind of getting panned by critics, and it shows him just looking so sullen. And you hear Simon Garfunkel's, "Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again." And there's a version of that same video. It's called the PTSD version of Sad Affleck, where it shows clips from Daredevil. So I can understand why some people don't even want to think about Daredevil, let alone Ben Affleck. He has his own issues to deal with now that he's Batman, but from what I heard, a good Batman at least. But if for those of you who don't know that there's a Daredevil series out, and I can't imagine any of you would if you're listening to us with this title of this video, and knowing what we usually talk about, all the geeky shit, there is a Netflix series, free to watch, and oddly enough, they actually released all of Season 2 all at once this year, which is really sweet. And it is a very, very good superhero series, kind of down to earth, not gritty like Christopher Nolan wise, but it's a genuinely good show that Max and I have both appreciated.
Mm-hmm. For both seasons, even though Season 2 had issues, which we will talk about,
yes,
nevertheless, it's a very competently made. I wouldn't even call it a superhero show, maybe more like a vigilante series, because the thing about Daredevil, the Netflix series, is that it is a part of the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. So Daredevil does exist in the same universe as Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, and even Guardians of the Galaxy, with talking raccoons and giant trees and whatnot. But
well, and they even referenced that in the first season where they talk about New York being destroyed by aliens.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, and this was what I thought was brilliant in the first season, was that it showed you, like, it does reference the invasion that happens at the end of the first Avengers movie. They refer to it as the incident, but the brilliance of it was that they showed how all of that, you know, larger cosmic superhero bullshit affected the normal people, and how the criminals of Hell's Kitchen even used that. The tragedy of, you know, people getting killed and buildings being destroyed and whatnot to actually make more money. So it was a brilliant view on the other stuff, the other side of the Marvel Universe, which you don't really see much in the movies because the movies have that PG-13, I don't want to say wholesome feel to it, but, you know, they kind of want to please everyone. So when we got to see Daredevil, it was... On the one hand, I can accept the fact that this happens in the same universe as the rest of the Marvel stuff, but on the other hand, it has such a beautiful bleak, gritty, in some cases even film noir feel to it that I automatically fell in love with the show starting from season 1. And the fact that all of the episodes were released simultaneously, and so you didn't have to wait an arbitrary amount of time, usually a week for it, was basically a blessing. You could just binge watch all that shit at once.
Yep. And I'll get into a little bit on Netflix, though, but one of the best things is Daredevil is basically like a Marvel version of Batman. You know, at least...
Batman with a Catholic guilt.
Catholic man.
Bible man.
Instead Bible man. Instead of batarangs, it's communion wafers. The power of Christ compels you. I'm a good Catholic boy, so I'm gonna dress like Satan and beat up bad guys. Oh
well,
boy.
you know, you live long enough, you see yourself become the villain. So.
Oh. Anyways, the interesting thing with Netflix too is it doesn't have an arbitrary time slot. If an episode needs to go over like 30 minutes, it can go over 30 minutes. They don't have to budget in commercial breaks, and they don't have to do that stupid last week on Daredevil and bring the audience back up to speeds, because you can binge watch them if you want to, or you can just go back and watch them on Netflix. So it gives the medium itself gives the story writers much more creative freedom to create genuinely interesting stories and individual episodes and take all the time they kind of need.
Yeah.
Additionally, it's also a show that's violent and as crass as fuck. So they can get away with a lot more gore and violence and swearing and, quote, realism than television. You know, I can't imagine, like, you know, Fox and ABC or whatever the hell else, other channels, CBS, creating a show that's anything like Daredevil.
No, let's just say that you would never see a crime boss decapitate a competitor using the door of his vehicle.
The door of his car.
Yeah, on something like The Arrow or The Flash.
Yes.
It's never going to happen.
Wilson Fisk, done masterfully by Vincent D'Onofrio, just smash a guy's head in with a fucking car door just because he interrupted his date.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's brutal. That's some brutal shit. But to go along with the brutality and what Max was saying earlier, this is Avengers is macro, where this is micro. This is down in the gutters, very, very, a lot more intimate than, you know, we're going to save the world. It's like, no, we're just going to save this block of Hell's Kitchen. You know, this guy is going to go out and just, you know, try to keep his own little section of town from being flushed down the toilet by the greed and the corruption.
Yeah.
So... But it's a lot more interesting to be able to bring these events down to the human level.
Yeah.
So instead of, I'm not saying like, you know, Tony Stark and whatnot are like, you know, unrelatable, but to be able to drag in like the common people and see the plight and feel it, I mean, it's a lot more interesting to go that route.
Yeah, well, see, I was actually going to say that Daredevil, to me as a character, is more fascinating than someone like Thor or even Captain America, because the thing about Daredevil is that some of the best stories involving this character portray him more as an anti-hero, as opposed to, you know, a straight-up goody-two-shoes, you know, Captain America type, where I'm going to save the United States and the president because that is the right thing to do.
Superman, Captain America, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those kinds of characters. Because the thing about Daredevil is that, and you see this in the very first season of Daredevil, that one of the reasons he does what he does is not just to help the common people, which obviously he does have a vested interest in his neighborhood, Hell's Kitchen, and he wants to see it improve, and he wants to see all the crime bosses leave it for good. But there's also sort of a selfish reason, where the reason why he does it is to also exercise his own demons. Remember how in season 1 he talks about how, due to his superhuman hearing and the rest of the senses, he kept hearing that one stepfather abusing, I think it was his daughter, somewhere down the block and whatnot, and he just couldn't take it anymore.
Yep.
So, plus, again, remember that Matt Murdock, the way he got his superpowers is that he got blinded by having, like, radioactive toxins or something splashed into his eyes.
Yeah, that was the comic book, I think. I think they took a slightly different route this way, didn't they?
It's pretty much the same thing. Chemicals get splashed into his eyes, so he becomes blind, but the rest of his senses get exacerbated and amplified. So
It's just with all the old comic tropes of radioactivity did this, radioactivity did that. It's like you think that in Chernobyl people would be like flying around and saving the world or something. But
Chernobyl, the human capital of superheroes. Yeah,
all the radioactivity. You see all these like rats and shit with like capes flying around.
Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is that basically Daredevil becomes a quote-unquote superhero due to a personal tragedy, and as someone who became blind as a child, you would think that that person would be a bit resentful of the rest of the world. Like, they would have issues. Not saying he's a villain, but he was robbed of his sight, so him taking it out on criminals does have like a personal element to it. Plus, he's also a Catholic, so that's an extra layer of it. And you can debate about, the veracity of the religion and whatnot, but he's a very complex character. And you cannot really shoehorn him into one category or another where, he's a superhero or he's a supervillain. No, he's a complex character. He's a flawed human being, and that's what makes him so fascinating.
Absolutely. But then, of course, that comes back and bites him in the ass in the second season with the rise of the Punisher. Another person who has a tragic past, another person who's out to do what they think is good, but the difference between Daredevil and the Punisher is a very, very razor's edge ideological one that even towards the end of season 2, Daredevil begins to see the Punisher's philosophy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Where, like the Punisher says, you knock them down, they get back up. I knock them down, they stay down permanently.
Mm-hmm. And so, again, you cannot argue against results.
Yeah, exactly. That's just it. That's his whole thing. Is you can't argue with my results because these criminals, these murderers, these people who hurt the innocent, they're not going to be hurting anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And like in and this will be a pretty spoiler intense episode, and we'll try to kind of keep some of the bigger ones to a minimum, but we can't promise a ton. But remember the one part where Matt Murdock and his entire crew of Foggy Nelson and Karen Page were trying to protect this one gangster, and it turns out that the gangster was actually doing hits for the mob and ended up killing a bunch of innocent people, and then the Punisher fleshes that out in front of Daredevil to kind of show him exactly who he's protecting.
Yeah, and of course that's also the episode when he kind of puts him in a no-win situation where Daredevil is forced to either shoot the Punisher to prevent the Punisher from shooting this guy. So it's either kill this criminal who used to do hits for the mob, or kill the Punisher in order to save this criminal. So whatever Daredevil does, he instantly loses.
But it's a false dilemma, because what he does is he picks the third option and shoots the chain and then tries to free himself, and then it gets into this big bloodbath.
Mm-hmm. But the entire confrontation between the Punisher and Daredevil, the writing was really, really good. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who noticed this, but there were a couple of parallels between the relationship between Batman and the Joker, specifically the kind of interaction they have in The Killing Joke.
There's even quotes.
Yeah, there's even a quote by the Punisher. There's even a moment when the Punisher says, "Truth be told, Red, you're only one bad day away from being me," which is obviously what the Joker says in The Killing Joke when he explains his origin story, where all it took was for a sane man to fall into depths of lunacy was just one really bad day.
Yes. And that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as some of the parallels between Daredevil and Batman. And I'm not going to get into which one came first or who did what. There's a profound similarity between Batman and especially The Dark Knight and Daredevil because of the themes of are they doing the right thing? Are they just escalating things? Like when Daredevil took down Wilson Fisk, and then all of a sudden things kind of got thrown back into chaos, and there's even mention of these groups called the Devil Worshippers, who are people who also roam the streets and fight bad guys because they use Daredevil as like a guide or a mentor. Inspiration, yes. Just like the Sons of Batman in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, so there's lots of parallels, but I think the reason for those parallels is because, again, in the case of both Batman and Daredevil, they're not what you'd call superheroes. They're more like vigilantes. So there is that element of a man, an individual, taking justice into their own hands for the betterment of the rest of society, mind you. But
for what they think is the betterment of the rest of society. That's where the whole entire philosophical debate comes from. Are these people actually doing good, or are they just criminals themselves? Mm-hmm. Because I think Batman was I'm not gonna quote it though. Batman says something along the lines of, if I kill one criminal, I just create one more criminal.
Something like that. Although
in the same meme, it shows the Punisher underneath and says, if I kill 1,000 criminals, I only create one criminal.
Perhaps, yeah. So, yeah. Do you want to just start talking about like the positives and the negatives of season 2, what we liked, what we disliked?
Yeah, because we were just gonna just kind of sit here and circle jerk about how the series is very close as far as themes to like Batman. Of course, these realistic, far more realistic than aliens and men in iron suits and giant green monster shit. More realistic take on crime fighting than the big name superhero movies. I think that this is what kind of draws us to Batman, and it's also the same thing as drawing us currently to Daredevil. So
as well as the Punisher, obviously.
Oh yeah.
So as far as the positives go, the first thing is probably the biggest draw of season 2, as well as being its strongest element, and that is Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. Personally, I think that this version of the character, played by John Bernthal, is easily my favorite adaptation of the Punisher.
You don't like Dolph Lundgren?
I've never even seen that version of the character, so I cannot really comment. But
it's not as bad as everyone says it is, but it's not good.
Mm-hmm. Well, as long as it's not... Well, is it any worse than the Punisher Warzone version of the character?
I would say the Punisher Warzone is even worse than the 1980s Punisher, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, parkour rocket launcher scene, it has the gore and shit, though, but then it also goes into some really cartoony shit, like when Jigsaw is going around trying to recruit people and doing the whole Patton thing, where he stands in front of the flag and shit. It gets really corny in places, and I just didn't enjoy it at all.
Yeah, same here, but this version of the Punisher, it probably comes closest to the Thomas Jane version, especially the version that we saw in the Dirty Laundry short film.
Yeah.
Yeah, although one thing I appreciate is that they went in a different direction than what we usually see with the Punisher, in that they did a very good job of humanizing Frank Castle.
Right.
Because Karen Page even talks about this later in the season, when she talks about how there was this cover-up job to conceal Frank Castle's past, the fact that he used to be a soldier and whatnot, and she's talking to the editor of the newspaper, I think it's the Daily Tribune or something like that, and she says that when you wrote about Frank Castle, you didn't mention the fact that he was a father, that he was a husband, that he was a soldier and whatnot, a war hero, exactly. And that's actually the kind of stuff that season 2 of Daredevil highlighted. They showed that Frank Castle is in many ways a man, a human being, who was robbed of everything that was near and dear to him. And then once that happens, what does society tell him to do? It's like, well, it sucks to be you, Frank, but, you gotta take it on the chin. You gotta pick yourself up and move on with a smile on your face.
Dust yourself off? Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, from the perspective of Frank Castle, the Punisher, the system has failed him. So what is there left to do?
Exactly.
Just take it up the ass?
Well, and plus when Daredevil saves the Punisher from the Irish mob, or kind of saves him. I mean, Frank was kind of breaking out already. And they're in the graveyard, and Frank starts talking about how he told his daughter he would, he read this book to his daughter over and over and over, and finally she's like, read it again, and he's like, no, I'll read it to you again tomorrow. And then the next day, his daughter gets killed, and he wished he could have read it to her one more time. I mean, that's the kind of stuff in writing that will just fucking take a knife and stick it right in your heart and pull it out. I mean, it's just, it's powerful. And John Bernthal just fucking nailed it. I mean, he's my favorite scene in the entire film is obviously when he goes on a rampage inside the jail, but there's also another one that's equally as good where he's inside the pawn shop. Remember that, where the guy tries selling him like a DVD of like child pornography.
Yeah.
And he stops at the door, flips the open sign to close, walks back, and the guy thinks he's made a sale, right? Frank walks by, grabs an aluminum baseball bat, and beats the fuck out of him. Oh, I was jerking myself off dry at that point. I was like, yeah, you go, Frank!
As you should have, because that was a brilliant scene.
But again, that's what made the character of the Punisher so captivating, is that he does commit...
It's so cathartic.
It's so cathartic, and it's like he commits heinous acts of violence, obviously, but he does it against people who kind of deserve it. So it's a very complex issue. The whole,
Yeah. There's something that I kind of recognized within this version of the Punisher, and maybe even all of them, but especially this one. There's almost like an element of Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver in John Bernthal, where he even admits in court he enjoys killing these bad guys. He enjoys it. But like Travis Bickle, who was going to kill the president, but ended up killing a bunch of gangbangers and was praised a hero just on his choice of victims. Mm-hmm. So John Bernthal's Punisher could have easily been a villain who just goes out and kills innocent people just for shits and giggles, and he would have been obviously a villain. But he takes that same bloodlust, turns it towards the criminal element, and people think he's a hero. Yeah, and that gets played on quite a bit, because that courtroom scene, everybody's equally divided. Like one of the sons of his victims, maybe it's a mobster's son or something like that, is crying, saying, "You killed my dad," and you can just see that it just stings him, because it's like, oh man, I took away someone else's father, or kind of like my kids are taken away from me or something. So there's a lot of depth to this version of the Punisher, which I really enjoy, and also the good cathartic violence that everybody kind of craves on some level.
The Punisher stuff, it's very fascinating. It's divisive, but then again, it should be, because it's a complex issue.
There's a point.
So so again, I'd say that all the Punisher stuff was great. Mm-hmm. And personally, if it were up to me, I'd rather they have dedicated the entire season to the Daredevil versus Punisher stuff. I understand that they couldn't have, for obvious reasons. That was easily the strongest element of season 2.
Absolutely. And for those of you who have seen the Punisher in action, Netflix is rumored, nearly confirmed, that they are creating an entire Netflix Punisher series starring John Bernthal.
Yay! More graphic violence.
Absolutely. This version of the Punisher is also getting his own Netflix series, which is badass.
Yeah. And again, it's not like Disney is going to make a standalone Punisher movie a PG-13 one, because that would be a massive, massive disservice to the character.
Absolutely. Going around giving bad guys parking tickets again, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I did like the Thomas Jane version, though, but it just blew my mind that he was doing all this cloak and dagger and sneaky shit versus just blowing everyone away.
Mm-hmm. Obviously the Punisher was great. The second thing that I liked a lot about this season, although this can also be said about the first season, the fight scenes, the fight choreography is just beautiful. Mm-hmm. The stairwell fight that happens early in, I think it's like episode 3 or episode 4 of season 2. That fight scene was just beautiful. I've always had a thing for martial arts movies, so the fact that it wasn't really one uninterrupted shot, because there are a couple cuts that they're not really noticeable, but you can kind of see where they had to take a break there just to be able to pull off the complex choreography that happens there. But still, the fight is so intense and it lasts so long, and there's even a moment when you think it's so over, but there's an additional round there. Mm-hmm. And at one point you're not even sure if Daredevil will make it out alive, because of how many thugs he has to fight, especially with the last guy who was like, I don't know, 6'7", 300 pounds of muscle. But still, the fight scenes is including all the stuff in the later half of the season involving the ninjas and whatnot. It was really great. Although again, I gotta go back to the stairwell fight. I really enjoyed. There was a similar fight scene in the first season when Daredevil infiltrates the headquarters or the hideout of the Russian mob in order to save, I think it was like a child that they had kidnapped.
Yeah, they kidnap children and sell them as slaves or something like that. So
yeah, so again, it's a long, uninterrupted take, which I had a nagging suspicion about this, but I've recently learned that this is actually true, so this has been verified. But that entire fight scene was an homage to the fight scene in Oldboy. Have you ever seen Oldboy?
Oldboy is one where the guy was kept in a room for 12 years and he ends up like, fucking his daughter or something like that.
Yes, that's the one.
That's the one.
Uh-huh. So, and again, I'm talking about the original, not the unnecessary Spike Lee remake. But again, there's also a similar elongated fight sequence happening in the hall, and it's shot. All of it is shot in a like profile, and he's got a hammer, and it keeps going on and on. So again, the fight scenes, the fight choreography in the series is just beautiful.
Yep, absolutely.
The third one was, and this actually came as a surprise to me, but the third positive was the reappearance of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin.
You and I think too alike that I knew this was going to be the third one. Granted, I have a fourth technically, but it's kind of smaller than that. But yes, the Return of the Kingpin was, God, Vincent D'Onofrio is just fucking amazing as the Kingpin. I mean, you look at like the character in like, you know, I think in like the animated Spider-Man cartoons and that kind of stuff, and you know, pretty 2D big head gangster guy, and just the level of writing. I mean, you almost sympathize with this character because he is doing kind of what Daredevil is doing, or at least what he did in the first season. Vincent D'Onofrio, the Kingpin, was Wilson Fisk, was trying to better Hell's Kitchen, just like Daredevil was trying to do. What he was doing instead was he was trying to bring all these warring gangs and stuff underneath his own tent so he could control them. He was originally trying to buy all of the, you know, the slums and stuff at probably maybe a reasonable price to get to redevelop the entire thing to make a better city. He's trying to gentrify it, I guess. Granted, he has a short fuse and very, very violent tactics when he doesn't get what he wants, but for the most part, like, wasn't he only like killing like other gangsters? I mean, didn't he like blow up the shit out of the Russians and shit?
He did. Again, in this case, Wilson Fisk, unlike the previous adaptations of the character where he was just this straight-up villain, very two-dimensional...
Mustache twirler.
Yeah, like his thing was always that he was just this big, fat guy who had like a posh British accent and maybe some like a thing for the theatrical. But this version of Wilson Fisk is very different in that, especially once we get deeper into season 1 and we learn about his origins, and where he came from. Again, like you said, Wilson Fisk was just doing a thing similar to Daredevil, where he was doing everything in his power to improve Hell's Kitchen according to his own vision. So,
right. And that's where that whole entire conflict comes from in the first season. Is Daredevil's version of trying to help Hell's Kitchen is beating up bad guys. Wilson Fisk is trying to control them.
Because he sees himself as like a benevolent dictator.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the path to hell is paved with good intentions. But you also, like Rich Evans said when I overheard him talking on previously recorded, I really hate bringing them up every single time, but they hit the nail on the head so many times. But he said, you know, why is Wilson Fisk the bad guy? All the people he's killing are gangsters. I mean, sure, the only thing that happened that got Daredevil and the rest of those guys riled up against Wilson Fisk because he's such a bad guy was, I think, like one tenant, an old lady, got killed by some of the people who were trying to pressure her out of the building.
Yeah.
And there's no indication that was even directly Fisk, was it?
No, I think it was one of his henchmen. I mean, you could say that Wilson Fisk got the ball rolling, so he's partially responsible, but again, if we are to claim that Wilson Fisk is a villain, by the same logic, we can also say that, say, Don Corleone from The Godfather was also an unrepentant villain who all of us should despise, when that's not really the case because...
Exactly.
Or Paulie from Goodfellas, because as Henry Hill says in Goodfellas, like, you know, wise guys like Paulie, they were kind of like the cops for wise guys. Like, they would just offer protection. So it's a whole different world. It's a complex world, and it's just many shades of gray. It's not all black and white.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the series the most, is that there's no genuine bad guys. There's all these different shades of people, and that's what they are. They're people. They're not aliens. They're not robots. They're nothing that, you know, you can just go around and just kill indiscriminately because they're bad. Yeah, that alien riding the giant Leviathan thing flying through the city, yeah, that's bad. You can kill that. No, these are people. Complex people. Granted, a lot of them are darker shades than others, like the Russian brothers from the first season, but for the most part, the major characters are all very dynamic. And you sympathize with a lot of them, especially Fisk. I sympathized a ton with him. Didn't agree with half the shit he did, but I sympathized with a lot of the shit he had to do when he was a kid.
Yeah, and even in season 2, I mean, he ends up in prison, and he does stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
And he even, in a moment of a violent outburst, I think this was with the Punisher, he does sort of vent about all the stuff he has to do in prison just to survive, so... You kind of understand that, again, he doesn't really, he enjoys being in a position of power, but he doesn't always enjoy all the compromises he has to make. So
he does act like a spoiled brat in a lot of places. I mean, you can tell he doesn't like not getting his way.
Yeah.
I mean, when Matt Murdock confronts him inside the prison, I mean, Fisk blows his shit. And he blows his shit because Matt Murdock is threatening to keep him and his girlfriend apart.
Mm-hmm.
Which any guy who deeply loves his woman would blow his shit too.
Yeah. So again, it's a very complex character. It's a brilliant portrayal by Vincent D'Onofrio. Not a straight up mustached thrower where it's like, I want to control all of Hell's Kitchen, and you will not stop me, Daredevil. No, it's the complete opposite.
Absolutely. The fourth one this one really surprised me is I really liked the character of Karen Page in this season. Deborah Ann Woll really knocked it out of the park, I thought, with this version. I mean, you see her. I guess she's kind of like, maybe not a catalyst for the audience though, but you see how her character grows to actually like go from absolutely being terrified of the Punisher to being so sympathetic to all the shit that Frank Castle has done, and trying to prove to the world that he is not this monster that the district attorney is trying to frame him into being. He's not the murderer just going around killing innocent people. He's doing this crusade. She's trying to get it so people know that the Punisher was a family man and that he had everything taken from him by organized crime.
Yeah, she's definitely the one who's got the most vested interest in making sure that Frank Castle's side of the story is heard, even though initially Daredevil himself was the one who suggested that the offices of Nelson and Murdock defend the Punisher because no one else would, or rather the attorney that they had assigned to initially protect Castle was incompetent and he was ready to just throw in the towel.
Yep.
But still,
the usual public defender.
Yeah. Although as far as Karen Page goes, the one moment I liked with her was towards the end of the series. I think it was even the penultimate episode when the Punisher rescues her from Clancy Brown, and then subsequently also catches up with him and figures out that he's the one who was responsible for the death of his family. And she tries to plead with him, where it's like, no, don't do it, Frank. If you kill him, then there's no going back. And I like the fact that she was not able to quote unquote save Frank Castle.
Yep.
I like the fact that no, it's like this is what the Punisher does. He knows that his method is effective. You could argue about the moral justifications of what he does, but nevertheless, I like the fact there was no massive Disney-esque, like, oh, Karen, you're right, I don't really need to kill my
I've
enemies.
seen the light.
Yeah.
Well, isn't there almost like a? I mean, it's almost like a trope, but don't a lot of like women like bad boys because they think they can change them?
Pretty much.
I mean, even like Nelson was making a joke about that in The Simpsons when Milhouse was getting all emo, and Nelson's like, I can change him, and it's like, oh, that typical female thought. And I'm not bashing it, but there is like a trope for that. Oh, he's a bad guy and he's hurt and he's wounded, and I mean, you see that in Twilight, for God's sakes. You know, he's hurt and he's angsty and he's wounded, and I can save him.
Because I'm the one who understands him.
Yes, and that's kind of like with Karen Page, which is kind of a bit of a negative though. But I also like the fact that she was doing most of the detective work. Yeah, she was the one going through the newspaper articles and finding Frank Castle's history, and getting in touch with him, and he's saving her a couple times, and like in the diner where he tells her get the cook and the waitress and hide behind the thickest piece of stainless steel you can find, and he's blowing away the bad guys, and she's huddling in the background. She looks around the corner after everyone's dead, and she's like retching and just horrified by all the carnage that Frank's doing, and she still tries to save Frank.
Yeah,
because there's that glimmer of light, which it's a trope, but it's also just it gives her character quite a bit more to do in this season than even last. Even though she did quite a bit last season, most of the Wilson Fisk Daredevil crossovers happened through her.
Yeah, not a lot of actual investigation or law work by Daredevil himself or even Foggy Nelson. So it was Karen Page who was doing most of the investigation this season, because season 1 was Matt Murdock trying to take down Wilson Fisk as both an attorney and as a vigilante, whereas in this season he was dealing with the Punisher mostly as Daredevil, and then in the second half of the season he gets preoccupied with Elektra and the ninja stuff.
Yeah.
So it was up to her to continue the investigation.
Yes, exactly, and leaving Foggy Nelson, played by Eldon Henson, completely on his own. I mean, there's even scenes where he's just completely on his own. Matt Murdock is basically kind of pushing the entire law aspect of his life to the side to fulfill his need to be Daredevil. And that's the one thing I didn't care that much about, and we're kind of getting to the mid-range issues, is Foggy Nelson just didn't feel like he was doing a lot this season. I mean, he was defending the Punisher almost by himself, but beyond that, he was leaving the law firm and getting hired to go work for
Trinity.
Yeah, basically. What's the other comic series?
Jessica Jones.
Jessica Jones, yeah. They dropped that name quite a few times. So.
Yeah, the thing about Foggy, I mean, he was less of a comic relief character this season, but I don't know. I guess I don't have much to say about Foggy. I mean, obviously as a character, you could say that he has grown in that he was the one who delivered the opener at Frank Castle's trial. So he is kind of growing out of Matt Murdock's shadow. I'm curious to see where it all goes in the future. But yeah, as far as Foggy Nelson goes, I gotta be honest, I don't have much on him as a character.
Yeah. One thing I think that was kind of interesting, and when we mentioned Jessica Jones, and I might touch back up on this a bit later, but is it just me, or is Netflix trying to make their own cinematic universe?
Well, it's kind of been confirmed because they are.
I know, but I hate the idea of all these different studios getting their, creating cinematic universes. Oh, Mattel's going to make a universe where Jim and the Holograms meet G.I. Joe.
Okay, that is ridiculous.
Well, it gets to the point where everybody's trying to have this gigantic franchise, over-expansive franchise. They're not worried about making good movies. They're trying to find some way to tie into larger properties. I mean, Netflix genuinely makes a good Daredevil series. Okay, fine. Maybe they'll get another shot with, aren't they going to create like the Luke Cage series?
Yeah, Luke Cage is next, and after that is Iron Fist, and afterwards there's going to be a massive crossover series called The Defenders.
Yes,
starring Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, and Luke Cage. That's where I'm starting to I'm starting to get that rising feeling of vomit coming up my trachea.
I don't mind it if like a studio says, "Oh, we made one good hit, let's make another series." Fine, dandy. But you could just tell that they've had this planned out, that they're projecting, doing this whole 20-year plan like Marvel did, like Disney's doing with all the Han Solo sub movies, and Jesus Christ. I mean, everybody's trying to get this fucking expansive universe, and it just drives me up the fucking wall. And I mean, granted, if you make something good and you have something else good and you do a crossover, fine and dandy, I don't mind that. But to pre-plan all this stuff, I think it's like counting your chickens before they're hatched. You know, I mean, there's nothing saying that Iron Fist will be good. I'm hoping these things are just as qualitative as Daredevil, but there's no guarantee.
Yeah, but again, personally, I have not seen Jessica Jones, nor do I care all that much. So as long as Daredevil is good, and as long as, now that there's a good chance that we're going to get a standalone Punisher series, I'm also interested in that.
Yeah, it's a spin-off, but it's just I really hate the idea of it's just a trend that makes me wince. I mean, just look at Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman. I mean, DC's trying to jump headfirst into their own expanded universe, and it just drives me up the fucking wall that everybody thinks they need to have an expanded universe. And it's like, no, just make good movies, and if they happen to cross over, fine.
Yeah, I mean, personally, actually, no, I think we've made our point with how the extensive universe and stuff, it doesn't always work. We'd rather have just good standalone stories. So
yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as far as the kind of stuff that was in the middle that I wasn't really, it's not that it was bad, but it either wasn't as good as I thought it would be, or it didn't do enough for me. That would be Elektra.
Mm-hmm. Because you misogynist. How dare you not like the female character in this film? You horrible misogynist, you. This is all your fault.
Yeah, I know. Obviously, the only reason I like Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, is because he's
a male power fantasy.
Yeah, he has a Y chromosome, and Elektra just has two X chromosomes, so that makes all the difference. But no, the thing about Elektra is that she herself, obviously this version of the character was much better than the one that we saw in the Daredevil movie from back in, I think it was 2003.
Who the hell played as the 2003 Elektra? Was that,
Jennifer Garner?
Oh my god, yeah.
But this version of Elektra, on the one hand, she was kind of interesting as like the mysterious lover of Matt Murdock from his past, and her kind of having a similar upbringing to him was interesting, and the fact that she pretended to be this posh, rich socialite, but in reality she was the opposite. Like, it was interesting, I'll give you that, but the fact that towards the end of the season Matt Murdock was talking about her like how she's like the one true love of his life, I'm not really so sure about that.
Yeah, especially since their entire meeting was apparently orchestrated by Stick.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, to her, he was kind of just a mission early on, because Stick was trying to kind of reel him back. And the whole entire dilemma of, oh, here's the guy who killed your dad, kill him. I mean, it kind of grounds Matt Murdock and his stance on things, but if you have a woman who hands you a knife and says, yeah, kill this guy, it's hot, it'll turn me on, I'd be like,
get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible.
Yes, because otherwise you mouth off and that knife is going right against your dick.
Uh-huh. But, so, like, Elektra, again, I understand that they could not dedicate an entire season just to exploring the Punisher's origins, but the problem is, like, the second half of the season then almost, like, automatically, just like that, jumps track from the Punisher to Elektra and the Hand.
Yeah.
And the problem is, the problem with the Hand and all the ninja stuff was that there was a lot of effective setup. Like, we saw all of these intriguing puzzle pieces, like the giant hole in the middle of Manhattan, or all of these, the jar, which supposedly supposedly brings people back to life, and then
it's a portable Lazarus pit. They're ripping off Batman.
You also have these kids who, first we think that they were kidnapped by the Hand, but then we see that they've been brainwashed to the point where they're like mindless zombies, and that they willingly subject themselves to becoming donors slash incubators for this weird resurrection ritual. And again, all of this interesting stuff, and I really wanted to learn more about this ninja organization, but the problem is none of it has any payoff.
Yeah.
The payoff is that both Daredevil and Elektra get to fight a bunch of ninjas, but we never really learn about the organization. Again, you had mentioned Racial Ghoul and the League of Assassins / the League of Shadows, right? And that's what these guys reminded me most of, for several reasons. But the problem is, at the very least, we kind of knew what the League of Shadows wanted to do. Whereas with the Hand, okay, so they're a mysterious ninja organization that has existed for millennia. They're powerful. They worship this enigmatic black sky thing. But again, they keep name-dropping all of this stuff. They keep giving us exposition, but they never explain stuff like the whole black sky thing. Towards the end of the season, it is revealed
they keep saying it's a weapon.
Yeah. And mind you, in the first season, it was interesting when they also talked about the black sky, how it's a weapon, blah, blah, blah. But then when Daredevil and Stick infiltrate, I think it was a shipyard or the docks, and it's revealed that actually the black sky was this little kid. Like, that was interesting because you didn't expect it to be a child. So it's like, oh, okay, maybe he has some mystic powers or something like that. But then in season 2, it's revealed that, dun dun dun, oh my god, Elektra, you're the black sky. And for some reason, for a second, she considers becoming evil because, oh my god, my entire life, I knew it. It is my destiny, Matt, to become a supervillain or something like that. But, okay, so she's the black sky, but what is the black sky? Does she have any superpowers? Like, what is going on?
Well, it just pissed me the fuck off that she was doing such a quick mood swing. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, you're the black sky, and all of a sudden it's like flicking on a light. It's like, oh, I'm the black sky. I can be bad, and Matt's like, don't be bad, and it's like, click back off. I mean, it was the mood shift, the mood swing was just so abrupt. You know, it's like, oh, I could be bad. Don't be bad. Help Stick. Okay, fine. That's the end of it. And that's all there is.
Yeah, again, lots of interesting setup, lots of interesting ideas on display, but very little payoff. And I don't know if they're going to talk about this in season 3, for example, or...
That's kind of what I felt like it was, just kind of setting up season 3 is what I felt they were doing.
Maybe, but then again, you also have that scene with the final scene with Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, when he requests to review Matt Murdock's file once again. So I would guess that season 3 would involve the return of the Kingpin, and maybe, like, everyone keeps expecting this, that they're gonna make a direct adaptation of the Born Again storyline when Wilson Fisk learns that Matt Murdock and Daredevil are one and the same, and so he systematically sets out to destroy Matt Murdock's life one step at a time. I'm not really sure that they're gonna bring up the whole ninja angle again in season 3. Mind you, they'll have to bring it up again sometime in the future because, spoilers, at the end we see that no, Elektra is not really dead because they're gonna use the cheap discount version of the Lazarus Pit to bring her back to life. So they're going to talk about it again sometime in the future, but I'm not really sure that's going to happen in season 3.
See, what they're going to do is they're going to have this season 3 where Wilson Fisk is at jail and he's doing all this really cool stuff, and Daredevil's going to have to fight Fisk, and there's going to be this gigantic another gigantic moral implication, and they're going to cut off right in the middle of the season and be like, oh yeah, Elektra's back just because she's there.
Yeah. I'm hoping that doesn't really happen because, again, as far as like negatives go, I think that season 2 would have benefited from having one concrete storyline / narrative. Just focus on the Punisher. Because the thing about Elektra and the Hand is, again, it came out of nowhere and it didn't really amount to anything if you think about it.
Yeah, and that's it just goes. it's no more illustrated than at the very, very last episode. And again, if you're listening to this, you're gonna get spoiled out the ass. So, anyways, there's the scene where there's like 50 ninjas that Elektra and Daredevil have to fight through. And they're like, there's 50 of them. What are we going to do? We're going to die, aren't we? Oh, I love you, Matt. I love you, Elektra. And then I'm sitting there thinking, well, where's the Punisher and a fucking Gatling gun? I mean, I was like, oh, they're going to run out there. And all of a sudden the Punisher's going to be there too. And it's going to be this gigantic fucking epic battle where all three of the main characters, the main heroes, are going to be all like on the rooftop killing all these ninjas. And, you know, knives and bullets and everything else flying everywhere. And no, they go out there and Elektra and Daredevil, they get a one-on-one with Nobu. And then they start fighting the bad guys, the bad ninjas. And then the Punisher is up on the roof and he shoots like two of them and then disappears. And it's like, wow, that's
yeah,
that's totally what I expected, you know. A 6-second cameo from the Punisher. See you later. I'll be seeing you around, Red. And it's like, dude, you could have been on that rooftop or sniping dozens of ninjas from the roof, but you just like were there for like half second. It's like they completely shifted focus.
I don't know. It almost feels like the two halves were written by two different teams of writers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, like you mentioned Nobu, and the thing about Nobu is that ultimately he ends up being the big bad of season 2, just by the fact that he's the villain that Elektra and Daredevil and also Stick defeat at the end. But again, the thing about Nobu and the rest of the ninja stuff was, it was interesting in season 1 because of how different it was. Like in season 1, the first couple episodes, it's mainly Daredevil versus pimps, gangsters, the Russian mob, so it's very, very grounded. And then halfway through the show, Stick reappears, and we're introduced to the Hand and all of their mysticisms, and ninjutsu, and the Black Sky, and whatnot. And then Wilson Fisk also hires Nobu, who's this, like a legit ninja, who can actually go toe-to-toe with Daredevil.
But yeah, it's because Wilson Fisk is in league with the Yakuza.
Yeah. Or who he thinks is the Yakuza, but in reality they're the Hand, as we learn in Season 2, but still.
So again, Nobu was interesting because he was different, but to make him the main villain of Season 2, it doesn't really work, especially if you're not really gonna explain who he is, what the Hand are, what their ultimate objective is, because I'm just gonna say it, Nobu is no Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah, obviously. But I guess, to me, this feels like they're just setting up a third season. They basically used the entire last half of the second season to set up a third. I mean, Stick came back, Elektra's in this picture all of a sudden, and the entire thing just kind of forks away from the Punisher story and, you know, the moral implications of this character and maybe maybe there's more citizens out there going around killing bad guys and maybe some innocent people get killed. I mean, there's so many avenues you can take with a vigilante story, and when vigilanteism goes too far, and instead it's like, oh yeah, Karen Page, yeah, you can go after the Punisher and deal with that story. We want to talk about Elektra.
Yeah, and the ninjas.
Yeah.
So again, I guess now would be a good time for us to talk about how things could be remedied in Season 3, and I think that, once again, Season 3 could benefit from having a single storyline, because this was what was great about Season 1, in that from Episode 1 to Episode, I think, 13, the last one, it was a natural progression where it was an uphill battle for Matt Murdock and friends, where they were trying to expose and bring down the Kingpin, both as an attorney and as well as Daredevil the Vigilante.
Right. There's a clear goal.
Yeah, and there was a brilliant progression, like I said, from beginning to end, whereas with Season 2, we start with the Punisher, which is great, but then halfway through we shift tracks and we focus on Elektra and the ninjas. So in Season 3, like, I understand that you want to expand the universe and introduce as many varied characters from Daredevil's 50-plus year history, but still, focus on a single storyline, preferably a personal storyline that has that's very close to Matt Murdock as a character, because again, you could say that the ninja stuff in Elektra was close because they used to date and whatnot. But
well, the Elektra stuff, just to defend it a bit, not that I'm saying the Punisher should not have been in the series. I definitely think that if you look at IMDb, the Punisher episodes, like the New York's Finest, are the highest rated episodes on IMDb. But as far as like the Daredevil, though, I mean, Elektra's stuff belongs in the Daredevil universe a bit more than Punisher's does. But if they would have split off Elektra's stuff to be in like season 3 and be the main focus of season 3, and explain the hand, and maybe the angle in season 2 could have been strictly, the legality of trying to defend the Punisher. Punisher escapes. They gotta find the Punisher. They gotta bring him back to justice. Turns out there's a big conspiracy. All of them are using their resources to try to prove that the Punisher is not exactly a bad guy. There's a bigger conspiracy against him. Instead of just sending an intern, Karen Page, to do all of it for them. And Daredevil is going out on his little midnight rendezvous. Third season should have been Elektra centered, where Elektra, just like she did in this season, tried to lure Matt Murdock away from his family, his daylight obligations, and to run away with her and become a vigilante and a ninja, and they can have so much fun just like the old days. And you can see how he's like, certainly getting tempted to do all this stuff, to be the masked vigilante that Elektra can be full time and not have to worry about the attorney office. They don't have to worry about
the boring, mundane routine of everyday life.
Exactly. He can break away from that and become who he really is. This should have been 2 separate seasons instead of trying to mix the 2 together so that neither one of them are as strong as they should have been.
Yeah. Well, again, the Punisher stuff is good. It's just it's a bit of a letdown that Karen Page is the one who has the most screen time with the Punisher, as opposed to Matt Murdock and even Fogg Nelson, because Foggy barely interacts with him at all.
Exactly.
So yeah, in the future, going into season 3, pick one subject matter / one storyline and do the best you can to flesh it out as much as possible, as opposed to trying to combine 2 or 3 very different stories from the Daredevil lore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's hard to explain. I mean, you don't want to just, if you have like one very, very narrow storyline to go through, it could be a boring season, because it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna go find the Punisher again. Oh yeah, they're gonna find the Punisher. He's killing people again. But you can still have one main goal, like take down Wilson Fisk, and still have, the smaller bad guys that are all tied underneath that umbrella.
Yeah, well, that's what season 1 did, because in addition to Wilson Fisk, you also had the 2 Russian brothers, you had Madame Gao, and all the weird stuff with the Chinese where they employed the blind to produce their drugs, and you had Nobu and the ninjas. But at the end of the day, the end goal was always to bring down Wilson Fisk.
Right.
Whereas in season 2, there was really no end goal, because the Hand and Elektra and Nobu just come entirely out of the left field. They're there for the final 6 or 7 episodes, and then they just disappear into nothing. And that's when Matt Murdock goes back to, because halfway through the season he begins a legitimate relationship with Karen Page, but that's put on hold because Elektra is back. And then once Elektra is out of the picture, that's when he goes back to his old office and confesses that, Karen, I'm Daredevil.
Yep, exactly. I mean, imagine it this way. Analogy, since Batman and Daredevil are so close in several themes, imagine if Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight happened like this. So there's a Joker, and Batman has to go out and find the Joker, and there's this big conflict of, morality and order, chaos, all that fun stuff. But then halfway through the movie, Catwoman's here. Well, Robin, someone else, Commissioner Gordon. Yeah, Commissioner Gordon, you, second fiddle. You go out and find Joker. I'm gonna go hang out with Catwoman. That's basically what happened in this season of Daredevil, where you have this really strong philosophical fight between, how far is too far with vigilantism and, the consequences and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden here comes a love interest that derails the entire thing, and shifts the focus so that second fiddle has to, go after who the original main bad guy was.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's pretty much relationships in a nutshell.
Well, yeah,
isn't it? A guy gets himself some peace on the side, and all of a sudden he no longer can see his friends because, no, guys, she's the one.
Would you rather hang out with clowns or get some pussy? Oh, yeah. I said it.